You're listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Recent interviews with Clint Lacey, the Missouri historian and writer for TBR. The name came up Gary Ayres in our conversation, and I remember Gary several years ago. He had asked me to speak at a banquet that he was hosting, that he was organizing, and I got to meet Gary at that time, and just a great guy. He's for years been a commander in the SCV there in Missouri. He's put together some very large national heritage events, and just a great guy. And I kind of lost touch with him, but I looked on our subscriber list, and sure enough, wow, Gary Ayres was a subscriber to the Dixie Heritage Letter. And of course, I was glad to find out that he was. But so I had his contact information, and I was able to reach out to him, and found out that he had written a book, and the book was entitled The Forgotten Few. It was the history of St. Clair County, Missouri. And so he said, let me send you a copy of the book, and he did, and I read it, and it was just fascinating reading. And so I decided, I said, I got to get Gary on the radio show, and I called him back, and he said, yeah, I'd love to do an interview. And so we talk about any of a number of things. Of course, St. Clair County, Missouri, you say, well, I'm not even from Missouri, and I've never heard of St. Clair County, so why do I want to stay tuned into a broadcast about St. Clair County, Missouri? Well, among other things, some of the more famous residents of St. Clair County were Jesse James, Cole Younger, Mark Twain, just to name a few. So it's a pretty interesting history. We're also going to talk at length about slavery. Would not have been my choice of subjects, but Gary wrote about it at length in his book, and the subject came up, so we went ahead and we had a rather lengthy and I believe very interesting conversation on the subject. Again, just more stuff that you'll want to stay tuned for. And you'll also notice that Gary pronounces it Missouri, as I pronounce it Missouri. You've probably picked up on that. Say, why do you call it Missouri? Why don't you call it Missouri? Well, several years ago, I was preaching at a church actually, and I said Missouri. And an old deacon got up and stood up. He said, preacher, thank you. I said, okay, for what? He said, for saying it right. I said, okay, what did I say? He said, you said Missouri. He said, I'm tired of all these Yankee preachers coming down here and saying Missouri. He said, it's Missouri. And by the way, the locals, the people who are from Missouri, who live in Missouri, they get really offended when these entertainers come in, especially in the Branson area, and they call it Missouri. Real Missourians know that it's Missouri, and only Yankees call it Missouri. And so, with that understanding, here's our interview with Missourian Gary Ayres.
You.
I just brushed my teeth with a new toothbrush for the first time, and it's the first time I've ever used a sonic toothbrush, and I felt like it was going to vibrate my teeth right out of my jaw, but... Other than that, I'm blessed. My ears are ringing, but I'm blessed. So you had mentioned that you do not have cancer, but you're having to go to an oncology center for treatment. What's going on right now?
Illness of porphyria. It's like a blood disorder, and the only place that they care for it is the cancer center. You know, I do my treatment, and the treatments are very, very expensive, but thanks to the VA, you know, they're taking care of everything.
So I guess you had a treatment yesterday.
Yes. Have one every other day. And that's all the reason I'm so tired sometimes. It takes a while for me to get going.
You know, it's just amazing. How do I say this, Brother Gary? Because, you know, as much as it is to go through some of that stuff, you know, that wasn't available to our ancestors. They would have just, they'd have just gone to Jesus.
Uh-huh.
So...
Well, I look at the people that's up there that has the cancer and what they're going through, and I just count myself fortunate there because you know they're going through it worse, and I just feel unfortunate that I'm not in their shoes.
Right.
No matter how you are, there's always someone that's going to be, say, a little worse off and needs more help, and that's what we're supposed to do.
Yep. You had started at the beginning of your book, A Forgotten Few. You said the story of St. Clair County starts in Virginia. Of course, St. Clair County is in Missouri, but you said the story starts in Virginia.
Well, yes, because the first settlers come to St. Clair County were from Virginia. They brought their slaves. One of the ladies, she was 100. She lived till 115 years. She claimed to be one of the first slaves in St. Clair County, and that's why I say it started in Virginia. Their land was playing out. They'd over farmed their land. They were looking for land, and Virginia people from Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and they started west, and thought Missouri would be a good place to stop.
So there just wasn't enough land in Virginia to go around, or had they over-farmed the land, or what had happened?
Yeah, they over-farmed the land. They were planting cotton and tobacco, and they just over-farmed it. And so they weren't, the land, at that time, they couldn't build it up, replenish the nutrients and stuff in the land, in the ground. And it would become poor to grow crops.
It's amazing because the answer to that was in the Bible, and no one would listen to it. But God told the ancient Israelites. He told them. He said to not plant a crop every seventh year, and let the land rest. But the ancient Israelites wouldn't obey that admonition, and I guess the American settlers didn't obey it either. So,
no, they just. I call it greed, and then maybe not knowing, not wanting to know, but they found something that was real good, and they just ran it to the ground.
You had said that the first Thanksgiving, over a year before the Pilgrims had landed in Massachusetts, that the first Thanksgiving actually took place in Virginia.
It was Berkeley 100 colony. Took place, I think, 1 year, about 1 year, 17 days before the Pilgrims came in. It was real hard. I mean, they lost a lot of people. They were able to continue, and that colony was never broken up. It continued right on, and that's something that's very few. I was surprised to see that. But few people realize that. And at the Berkeley Plantation, there at the site, it's quite a site, a large, monument for them.
So, do you know what they ate at the first Thanksgiving dinner?
No, that I can't say. I would say just by the time that they had landed there and everything, they ate whatever they could, hunt for, and whatever they had aboard ship.
Well, you study the first, what we consider the first Thanksgiving that the Pilgrims had and they ate venison.
Yes.
And myself not being a fan of turkey, that's always my argument, is that we should be eating venison for Thanksgiving and not that horrible dry turkey. People don't seem persuaded by my argument. The facts of history be damned, I guess.
Well, and I'm sure that, that's what they ate also, and because there would have been plenty. There would have been plenty of venison. There would have been plenty of venison. And I don't know if they ate turkey. I don't know. 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 I of that in the area.
I say usually for Thanksgiving, I usually have a big old steak. Of course, I'm usually out of the country at Thanksgiving. And so, I'm in countries where they're not celebrating it.
Uh-huh.
But it's funny because I don't know how many different countries I have been in over the years at Thanksgiving time. And knowing that I'm an American, they'll think that I want to eat turkey on that day. And I'm like, no, I don't. If I wanted to eat turkey, I would have stayed home.
Yeah.
But
we'll alternate, our food. Sometimes we'll have kind of a traditional Thanksgiving. To me, Thanksgiving is one of the more important holidays for home here. But we will alternate. Be traditional one year, and maybe the next year nothing at all like that.
This year at Thanksgiving time, I'll be in the Dominican Republic. Of course, I'll take the family with me. So we'll be together at that time. But
Dominican Republic.
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
But it's been a good time for me to schedule mission trips and other things.
Uh-huh.
And I think one of the reasons is because it's a time when so many people want to be home. Not only is the availability to go and do things in other places more open, but also the international travel fare is surprisingly inexpensive at that time. Of course, domestic airfare and so forth is just outrageous because everybody wants to be home for Thanksgiving, so they're flying to wherever in the United States home is for them. But the airlines can't hardly, give tickets away for people to leave the country at that time. So the international rates are just exceptional.
In the Dominican Republic, where you visited, would they want to give you like a Thanksgiving a dinner in honor of our Thanksgiving, or would they just continue on their normal activities?
They would continue on their normal activities. I'll usually be asked at some point if they want, if I want for them to make, some of the more traditional things like turkey or sweet potatoes or and so forth. And I love sweet potatoes, so I never say no to sweet potatoes. Never say no. Never say no to pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie. But the turkey, like, we can have the chicken or, whatever, you normally have. If I'm eating in a restaurant on Thanksgiving, it's a big special day, so I'll order a steak. One time I was in a restaurant in Mexico. We were in an area where there were a lot of Canadians. And for whatever reason, even though Canada celebrates their Thanksgiving at a totally different time, the restaurant decided that they were going to serve a traditional American Thanksgiving feast for the Canadians. Long story short, they ran out of turkey. Apparently, they had prepared 26 turkeys. And what happened was they brought our food out, and I'm like, this isn't turkey. It was like chicken breast that had been sliced with turkey gravy over it. And there was some sweet potatoes, and there was some cranberry sauce, and there was some stuffing, everything. But I asked the waiter, I said, this is not turkey. I said, this is chicken. And so the waiter goes to the kitchen, and the chef comes out, and I told the chef, I said, this is chicken. A Canadian lady sitting at a table in her shot, she said, yeah, she said, this is chicken. This isn't turkey. And, and so the chef told us that they had prepared 26 turkeys and had run out. That they had so many people come in that night requesting the traditional American Thanksgiving dinner that they had run out of turkey, even though they had prepared 26 of them. So they started substituting chicken.
I didn't think you'd know the difference.
I will say this, though. That was the best tasting turkey I'd ever eaten.
I take it you're not a real turkey fan.
No, I'm not. So you had mentioned something that I did not realize. I probably should have realized it, but it's good to learn something every time you read another book. You had mentioned that Missouri had the third largest number of battles in the war between the states.
Yes, they did. Virginia had the first. They were number one. They had the most battles. Then Tennessee, and then Missouri. They were fairly close.
We make the mistake when we study the war and when we study the battles of focusing almost entirely on Virginia. And so by letting us know that Missouri had such a high number of battles, basically what you're telling us is that at least a third of the war we're totally neglecting in our study.
Yes. Some of the reasons why I think is, being from Missouri, it's hard to not sound like I'm in favor to Missouri. But the North really understood what many did not understand. Missouri was important in where it set, just everything. It was, the jumping off point, to the west. And they knew that they did everything they could to control Missouri, to keep Missouri, because they knew of the importance of it. And I think that's a lot of reasons why they never accepted Missouri's secession.
I know there's a lot in Missouri. Of course, we have a mutual friend in Clint Lacey, the editor of the Barnes Review. I did a radio interview with him yesterday, and he told me, he said that Clint still has not exhausted all of the activity of the Civil War in Missouri.
But there was a lot of fighting here, yes, and it was to, they wanted to keep, the North wanted to keep Missouri, without fail. They wanted to keep Missouri.
Why do you think that was? Why was it so important?
Like I said, one thing, it was the beginning of the West. It had, you went through Missouri to get to the West Coast, through the rivers, the transcontinental, all that was in plan to put a railroad through. And geographically, it was important in the Union. They came to Missouri even before Sumter was fired on and waged war even with the citizens, killed women, children, trying to take everything before they could even secede.
You had mentioned two Lincolns in the book. Obviously, I'm guessing you were referring to the Abraham Lincoln of history and then the Abraham Lincoln of reality, or were you referring to a different set of two Lincolns?
He was a very good politician. He said one thing, but he would do another. All through his life, he said he didn't care for slavery, but he didn't believe that the government had any say in it, that it was a state issue. He believed that. He said that all the way up until he did his Gettysburg Address. That was going totally against what he had always said, and he was using that as a ploy to try to change the tide of the war, and it did. It really benefited the North.
Well, there you gone, done and did it, Gary. You brought us into the subject, the topic, the issue of race. And we'll go ahead and we'll pursue that topic, and we'll talk about slavery and all of that. But first, let's have a commercial from our sponsor, the Barnes Review. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you could subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
I noticed that you began your book, and you even began our discussion, with the subject of slavery. I'm curious, why even mention slavery at all? Why not just tell the story of settlement to St. Clair County, Missouri, and the involvement of some of its more noble war heroes without actually even bringing up the sticky subject of slavery?
Of course, we don't want slavery. Any reasonable person would be against it. But slavery was a very important part of our history all over the states and would-be states. Slavery was very important. I think slavery is looked at, as not so evil, but I mean, there was good things in it. I think that there would be better relations today.
Well, you had mentioned in your book, since you talk at length, or you write at length about slavery in the book, we'll talk about it here. 70% of Africans in the slave trade went to Brazil, and then a large number went to the Caribbean islands, so that only about 6% made it to anywhere in the United States, north or south.
Brazil and the Caribbean, the islands, they wanted only men, and the U.S. brought in the women and children, and of course then they multiplied, and then over that period of time the U.S. had more slaves than other places.
So, another thing to notice too is that obviously in Brazil, and especially on those Caribbean islands, that they were working the slaves to death.
Yes.
Whereas in this country they were not.
That's right. Like I said, we don't want slavery ever again, but it's our history, and we need to keep it in there and look at it in what it was and what it did. Slave masters, now there were always exceptions, to everything, but I believe by far the slave masters were more, congenial to their slaves. They got off mostly on Saturday and Sunday. Sunday they went to church, and they went to church with the whites. Like Saturday, they were allowed to work on things for themselves, and where they could, make money on the side. There were a number of slaves then that bought their freedom from doing that. Their masters allowed them to work and make money, and that they allowed them to free themselves. They didn't want them, and they didn't work them to death because they had a lot of money involved in the slave. And what good does it do to harm that slave if you're wanting work from him?
Well, you had, in chapter 3, you had said that the price of a slave indexed for inflation would be about the equivalent of the price of a tractor today. And so beating your slave would be akin to a farmer going out and beating his tractor with a hammer.
Well, yes. Why would a slave want to whip his, why would a master want to whip his slave, harm him, hurt him, and then tell him to go out and work? He's not going to, and he's not going to be able to work very much. It'd be like you taking your tractor, beating it up, and then expecting it to work for you. That may not be a very good analogy from a farmer's standpoint. That's what I was looking at it. And how I got that was, I had a friend that, told me a story. He said, I need to do some work, but Gary, would you hand me that hammer? And I couldn't figure out why he wanted a hammer. And he said, well, I'm going to beat my tractor up before I go to work. And then I got what he was getting at. And he said, that's the same thing as beating your slaves before you go to work. I don't believe, they beat their slaves that much. Now, what I have discovered in my research was, and this was new to me, but the white slavery, they would beat the whites, kind of to show the blacks, well, this is what we can do. And they didn't have that much money invested in the whites. And white slavery was more so in the very beginning of our country.
Well, you had mentioned that the British at one point had determined to exterminate the Irish, and they were going to do that by enslaving them all in the New World and working them to death.
Yes, King James made a proclamation that they were to send to the American colonies to serve as slaves. They plainly said that this is where the money is the slaves. But they were meaning the white slaves, because at that time, there was more white slaves than black. And the English hated the Irish. And in my research, they tried to exterminate the Irish. I mean, they hated them that much. Cromwell got a shipload of children, 10 to 14, and shipped them to the colonies. But remember, the English, they had put out through their parliament to send white to America. They would, whether they wanted to or not, they would kidnap anyone that they could get on board on ship, and they would bring them to the colonies. They felt that was getting rid of them, out of their sight, and bringing them here.
Another thing you had pointed out in your book was that the Negro slaves could buy their freedom, or they could earn their freedom by labor, but that the Irish not, that they were forced to be slaves until death.
They were not afforded the opportunity as the blacks. Like I said earlier, the blacks, they gave them Saturday and Sundays off, and Saturdays they could work for themselves to make money, and Sunday too if they wanted. But the Irish, the white slaves, they worked continual. The white slaves, and also their life expectancy was so much shorter. They didn't cost much, so they just worked them to the ground. I find that real disturbing that we don't hear about these things or taught these things in our schools. And like I said, slavery was a very important part of our country, I believe. Regardless of, it was a terrible institution.
You made reference, and of course, when we're getting into white slavery, we're already into chapters 4 and 5 of your book. Back in chapter 3, you had said that in the North, even when they had released most of their slaves and or sold them to owners in the South, that slavery really continued there, because basically what they did is they just worked people at starvation wages in factories, and that was even worse than slavery.
A good master, took care of his slaves. He clothed them, made sure they had medical care. They did things with the white families on special days. The whites would even put out, a big, let them use their house for a marriage. And when a slave got, say, too old that he couldn't work, they would care for him. He would be given, a small amount of ground and everything where he could, say, like retire. That's never told. In the North, in the factories, they used their labor. They weren't slaves, but they were, to me, worse, because they worked them all, 24 hours if they could, every day, and children to keep the factories going. When you work like that so much, you're not going to live very long.
And the quality of life just isn't there, because you're not making a living wage.
And a good master did take care of his slaves. He had, that's where a lot of his money was at. And why would he harm? Why would he, not take care of them? I think if a normal person would just sit back and think about it, because you always hear of the beatings and the splitting away of the families and everything. I'm sure, yes, some of that happened, but I don't believe it happened as much. Lincoln wanted this here. He wanted to send the blacks elsewhere. Actually, he said that the blacks and the whites were different type of people. They could never live together. He didn't believe. And he chose, if there was going to be a superior race, then he chose the white to be the superior race. Now, Lincoln said that. He started several colonies, shipped the blacks to Liberia and a couple other places. Some of the blacks didn't want to go because they said, well, they were born here. That was foreign to them. And they chose to stay with the slaves as a slave. So, I think, even though it's a foreign place, if you're told, well, you're given your freedom, but then, you're going to have to, really, work hard, say, or you can stay here as a slave and your master will care for you. That says a lot. And many of the slaves stayed. They would not go to the places where Lincoln wanted to send them.
Right.
Oh, there was Monrovia, the capital of one of the countries.
Liberia.
I believe, at that time.
You had mentioned that the Emancipation Proclamation actually freed no slaves.
Was to free slaves only in the South, the states that was in rebellion. Had cities out, well, like New Orleans. It was not considered rebellious. Much of Tennessee wasn't considered rebellious. Missouri wasn't considered rebellious. The rebellious states, that's the only place that the Emancipation Proclamation was to free the slaves. Then, if a slave was to have ran away, then our laws said that they had to be held so they could be given back to their owners. That doesn't sit well to me with the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, Lincoln did that, like I said earlier, try to get a foot up in the war because they were losing. He was very masterful in that. It really didn't become law until, I believe it was like in December. To say the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves right then, no, it didn't. Now, it may have freed some, but as a whole, as a picture, it didn't free any slaves in the United States. He was going over into a newly made country to free their slaves. That'd be like him going to Mexico and freeing slaves.
Right. You had quoted at length from the slave narratives. In fact, you had a whole chapter that was just excerpts from the 1930s slave narratives. And you had the comment that having read the slave narratives, you question if our modern-day freedom is not worse than antebellum slavery.
Just those few that I put in the book. I didn't read them before. I just turned the page, pointed a finger, and said, "This is the one that's going to go in next." After reading them all, and I had read the slave narratives before.
And you did what you did, so randomly picking them so that you couldn't be accused of cherry-picking your quotations.
No, I didn't cherry-pick. No. Even the slaves themselves, since slavery had been abolished, their kids were running wild. They didn't have money to take care of themselves, go to the doctor, or any of that. And they were always cared for, slaves. And some of the slaves said, "We wonder if we were better off slaves. We were better off."
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. The things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
To kind of move on from slavery a little bit, in Chapter 9, you stated that the first settlers arrived in St. Clair County in 1831?
Yes. Jacob Kuhn was considered the first settler in St. Clair County.
And then you said that by 1850 that there were several prosperous colonies, so that was only 19 years.
Yes. Let's see, Osceola, very prosperous. Waterways was just south of Osceola, where the paddle wheels could come through. It had a population of 3,000. No one knows exactly, but 3,000, 3,300, 3,500. Then close by was Monegaw Springs. It was a big settlement, and it had a dock people worked off from. There was a community, Chalk Level, a community that many called Montgomery, but it was the blacks that settled there, and it was right next to Monegaw Springs, but it was quite large.
And so what do you account for the prosperity of the area, that it grew so prolifically in such a short period of time?
There was, in St. Clair County, it seemed to be a place that everyone was looking for. A lot of land speculators had bought land in St. Clair County. Governor Jackson had bought land there. Samuel Clemens had bought land, a lot of land there. And all of this was in make themselves better. And then the war came and just tore it all up. St. Clair was Osceola, and then it's never recovered. Very, a large community town, They had everything.
Breaker one, might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy Cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at a brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Look, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with him. I'm down and I'm gone.
You know, there in the SCV with your John T. Coffee Camp, I remember you had the annual Heritage dinners. And I spoke in, I believe it was 2006, you invited me to be the speaker, and I remember driving over from Wichita to do that. I was pastoring in Wichita at the time. But, I mean, you literally filled a big banquet hall with hundreds of people from all over the country who had come to this annual Heritage dinner. I mean, when you put these on, they were quite the production.
Oh, yes, and we still have that for a rural area, and then getting them from all over the country. You know, getting people interested because they come from California, a lot from Texas. You know, I think that was I think that's pretty good. You know, our dinners, we promote the goodness and the right way of living. You know, and that's what we're about. We had folks from all over the United States come to the dinners, and we've had, of course, you spoke, and what you saved me, because if you remember when you spoke, it was at a moment's notice.
It was. I remember that. I think you would call me either that day or the day before.
You know, the folks that came was expecting someone else. They were just as happy, if not happier, to hear you speak, because what you had to say, you know, they really liked.
I remember I spoke on the Christian testimony of General James Ewell Brown Stewart, and at the time I had just published the book of that title. It was a 16-chapter book that totally ignored Stewart's military career and focused entirely upon Stewart the Christian. And Jeb Stewart IV had written the introduction to the book. And so I was speaking on that subject, and there was a young man, and his name was Aaron, and he came up to me at my book table afterwards, and we spoke for a while, and I had kind of forgotten about Aaron. And then back in, I want to say 2013, maybe it was, pastoring in Florida, I get a phone call from Aaron, and he, you know, reminds me who he was, and he told me that he had accepted Jesus as a Savior that night. He said, I've kind of bounced around. I've gone the Methodist church. He said he went to a Presbyterian church, an Episcopalian church. He went to a non-denominational church, different places. And he said at this particular time he was a student at the University of Missouri, and he was wanting to join a Baptist church. And to join the Baptist church, he had to be baptized. And he decided that rather than be baptized there at the church in Missouri, he wanted to fly to Orlando, have me baptize him, and then he would transfer his membership and join the church in Missouri that way. And so he flew to Orlando. I picked him up at the airport, and we went to a lake. And I baptized him there in a lake not too far from the airport. And then we went to dinner, and he got back on the plane. I took him back to the airport. He got back on the plane, and he flew back to Missouri.
Well, see, that tells a lot of your the program you gave and talk and everything, because you know you reached more than that person, but there was one person that you really reached, and for him to do that.
But I really did enjoy that Heritage dinner, and had I stayed there in Wichita and not moved across the country, I would have made it a point to attend the dinners, even if I weren't the speaker.
The folks in Wichita they continue to come to the dinners every year, so we get great support from them.
What I want to do here is I want to read the dedication of your book.
Okay.
And you said, dedicated to all the souls before us that endured the atrocities of invasion, murder, rape, pillage, thievery and destruction of property from a government that had abandoned their constitution to force their will in all ways to a peaceful state and group of states that had constitutionally made a new country, the Confederate States of America, and not to forget the descendants and to all the women, children, and elderly men shot down in cold blood in the doorways of their homes, and to those imprisoned just for being alive and being from Missouri. What inspired you?
All the souls before us that endured the atrocities of invasion, murder, rape, pillage, thievery, and destruction. I was really referring to the St. Louis Massacre, which happened in May of 1861, when Lion had come in and took over the armory for no reason, because Missouri hadn't done anything at that point. And that's where they killed women and children in the street. And this went on for a week. But they killed women and children. And as I say here, from a government that abandoned their constitution. I feel that Lincoln, he went against the Constitution in many ways and forced his will to the states that peacefully broke away from the U.S. Constitution and formed their own country. At that time, I feel that the U.S. Constitution allowed states to do that if they chose, and they did. Then I say to all the descendants, women and children and elderly men shot down in cold blood in the doorways of their homes. It happened to many. More personal there is my, I think, fourth great grandfather. One night, Jayhawkers from Kansas came up. He come to the door, and I don't know if they had words or what, but anyhow, they shot him. They killed him in the door, and right in his door. And he's an old man. They took his wife and daughter that was with him, and they put them in prison in St. Louis, just because, in the provost marshal record, is just because they were Missourians, and they were, they considered them dirty, low life, and that's where I come up with that, because they treated the people from Missouri like they were the lowest class of humans that existed. Right. In fact, Lyon said that he would rather see every man, woman, and child dead in Missouri before it seceded.
So then this is a very personal history for you.
Yes. Because, like I said, there were many, but then I have a personal connection with that.
So how does somebody get a copy of your book?
How do they? Okay, they go to my website, or they can just email me by my email. Send me a check, and I will send them the book.
I understand that in addition to writing the book, you were also the driving force behind a monument.
We have a large monument, and we've made a plaza out of it. It's got a brick with people's names in it, but it's a monument, folks that were murdered at the burning of Osceola. That really didn't end until approximately 13 years later. One of the men that survived the shooting, the U.S. Marshals hunted him down, and this was an old man, and he was in his field with the daughter, and they killed him and threw him in the river. It was bad.
Right.
A bad place to live.
Well, I appreciate all the work that you've done through the years to maintain the history and and to preserve the heritage of that area.
I stay active to help protect our monuments and our local things. But as far as they happen to walk away from the SCV to protect what they're supposed to be protecting, just shows that they have become a part of our political correctness crowd. For instance, these monuments that have been desecrated all over the country, not only Confederates, but George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. We have 5 laws that have been passed, and I put them in the book here, that protects these monuments. Yet our country or our laws will not abide by those laws and to protect. And because they're so afraid, I guess, that's where the SCV should be. Like I said, they have become part of the politically correct crowd, in my estimation. And like you said, and you walking away to protect what they're supposed to protect, there's nothing wrong with that. Because you're fulfilling what was asked of you from your ancestors. And the organization has failed to do that.
I know for a time, the SCV was really good at some stuff, especially when Ron Wilson was the commander. But when Denny Sweeney took over, it just went back to the, let's eat cookies and drink coffee and don't get anywhere near anything that has to do with politics.
Right. It was like more like a coffee clutch or tea party, Find help, assistance, organization, whatever, to really go after these people that desecrate the monuments, whether small, headstones, to the large monuments.
What I'm working around in Congress right now for, people wonder, I'm always talking about going to Washington, whatever, but they're like, you never say who you're meeting with or what you're doing. And the reason why is because the minute I let the name slip of people who will actually meet with me, they're going to have 500 liberals all over them like white on rice.
Yeah.
And
you just say the word Confederate, and you might as well forget any type of conversation meaningful.
But one of the things I'm starting to advocate for now is to get somebody in the House of Representatives to introduce a bill. Just a couple of years ago, if you told me I was going to do this, I would have said no. I would never. I believe in limited government, not expanded government, especially at the federal level. But what we've seen it in Tennessee, and we've seen it now twice in North Carolina, that local governments will not prosecute crimes against our heritage.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And so monument desecration needs to become a federal crime. Because the problem is like, in North Carolina, they when the local prosecutors won't do, obviously they made it clear that they're not going to do anything. I mean, even the first round in Durham, they just, they only put up misdemeanor charges for what were felonies, and then they dismiss those. And it's the same thing with this last round. People are committing felonies. The police officers are watching the felony. They know who did it, and instead they're arresting other people on misdemeanors. And so then the federal government, there needs to be an assurance that the federal government will come in and arrest these people and prosecute these people on felony charges when the locals won't do it. It's the same with what happened in Memphis. The mayor of Memphis and certain members of their city council should be brought up on federal felony charges. And the president of this green space organization that now runs that park, he basically removed Nathan Bedford Forrest's tombstone the other day. And if Tennessee's not going to prosecute him for it, then, certainly it becomes federal and it's just an automatic prosecution. But the thing is, though, is what I'm going after is not anything to assure the protection of Confederate monuments, because that idea won't float in Congress, but a generic Monument Protection Act. In other words, it would be just as illegal to pull down a menorah during the week of Hanukkah or to, disrupt the statue of Martin Luther King than it would be to disrupt a Confederate statue.
Well, I am going to go ahead and I am going to cut myself off there, because we are just about out of time for this week's episode of TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. And the thought that I continued with Gary, if I were to play any more of it, would take about 10 minutes, and we only have about 6 left. So rather than cut myself off at a less opportune stopping point, I will do it here. But I hope that our conversation today has been thought-provoking. Certainly did not expect for the conversation to go in the direction that it did, but I saw it was going in that direction, and to be totally honest, it was a good direction. I had absolutely no problem with it going in that direction whatsoever. Slavery, for example, not a comfortable subject for a lot of people, but I believe, tackled it. And also some of the political subject there at the end, especially dealing with some of our heritage organizations that are just dropping the ball when it comes to protecting our heritage. Definitely we can all do more, and I'm not saying that as an armchair quarterback at this moment. I'm saying that as someone who is very actively involved in the preservation and the protection of our heritage, and yet again, we can all be doing more. Take advantage of an opportunity to order his great book. It took me a weekend pretty much to read it. A few hours on Saturday, a few hours on Sunday after church, and I was able to finish the book. It's an easy read, but yet it's a good read. It's a very good read, and it will be worth the money that you will spend to get a copy of this book mailed to you. And I know that when you order it, that Gary will even sign it for you. After you order a copy of Gary's book, I want you to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net. And I want you to look at the back issues of the Dixie Heritage newsletter, if you're not already a subscriber. And then I want you to click on the link to give us your email address so that you can receive a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. And of course, when you do that, you'll also be signed up to receive those newsletters every week in your email box. Absolutely free of charge, no cost, no obligation. The ebook, no cost, no obligation. We just want to put the information in your hands. We just want to give you the knowledge that you need to fight the culture war. And so that's why we make this available. It's a ministry. It really is. People don't often think of politics as a ministry. They don't think of cultural engagement as a ministry, but it really, really is. And so that's why we make these materials available to you. I'd also like to invite you to go to the Barnes Review website, barnesreview.org. They're our sponsor here at TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. I'm going to tell you how companies like Google, companies like Bing, companies like Microsoft, companies like America Online, and other major media players, the Silicon Valley establishment, if you will, I'm going to tell you what their new strategy is for censorship, because the outright censorship and the deletion of accounts and all of that, they got enough backlash from that now they're doing it a little more subtly. And one of the things that they'll do is if there's a website that they do not like, they will declare it to be a security risk. And so then you go to a website, and this happened to the TBR website this week, or you go to whatever politically incorrect website they're wanting to censor, you go to it, and instead of getting your website, when you type in the address, a big warning flashes on your screen that says that it's an unsafe site, that the site's security certificate is invalid, that this site has been flagged, that if you log on to this site, it's going to steal all of your information, it's going to steal your credit card information and your social security number and your driver's license number, and it's going to jump right out of your computer screen and take your firstborn child and suck it back into your computer screen and steal it from you and so forth. And it's a really scary warning that pops up. 85% of people don't even know how to bypass this warning to go to the website anyways. Now, they've not blocked the website because you can change the security settings in your browser to get to it. But 85% of people don't know how to do that. And the other 15% probably won't do it either because they're afraid that, their computer's going to blow up if they visit this website, because that's what the warning told them. And so if you try to go to the Barnes Review website this week and you get that warning, ignore it, bypass it. The Barnes Review website is not going to blow your computer up. They're not going to steal your firstborn child. They're not going to pull your car out of your driveway. The only thing they're going to do is they're just going to give you some great information that you will be greatly benefited from reading. So, with that said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave you at the end of this broadcast with a little video. It's going to take us over our time. Those of you who are watching on the internet, it's no big deal. Those of you who are watching through the Barnes Review website, it's no big deal. We can go as long as we want. For those of you who are on a timed venue, obviously you won't get the material that goes past the hour. But for the rest of you, here at the end of this, what you're going to be viewing is the March 19th, 2013 baptism of Aaron Brummett that was mentioned earlier during my conversation with Gary Ayres. So until next week, from all of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, God bless.
Brother Aaron, have you received the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior?
Yes, sir.
In obedience to the great command of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, according to your public confession of faith in Him, I baptize you now, my brother Aaron, in the name of the Father, the Lord Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit, buried in the likeness of His death, raised to walk in newness of life.